And so we got ourselves a yacht and we headed off. I was up north. The guys took off from Plymouth. 16 miles later, the steering system failed. Brand new, very expensive, top-of-the-range system failed, so they had to turn back. Then they headed off, and just off the tip of the Scillies and the tip of England, the stern gland failed, and the ship began to fill up with water. So they scarpered over to Ireland and got into a shipyard there, and there they found that the engine had come off its mounts, that there was a whole lot of other problems, and I'm up in Greenland and I get a call first thing in the morning saying, "Trouble at mill, lad." They're down in Ireland, they've run out of money, they've run out of morale, they're about to go back to Australia, you better do something. And of course, I'm in this little town called Amasilik. The aeroplanes leave from an island about 20 or 30 kilometres away across the fjords, so I've got to get myself across there in a hurry. So from the previous year of the reconnaissance, I remembered a fellow called Peter the Hunter. So I ran about 3 kilometres down to his house and said, "Peter, I need a boat to get me across to the airfield." And he said, "Yeah, no trouble at all. Give us an hour to fuel up." So I went back to the house and then got a call from the guy who was going to fly me to Iceland that he couldn't come in that day, but he'd come in the next day and he'd fly me across in his chopper, so there was no cost. So they thought, right, I've got to stop Peter. So I ran all the way back to Peter's place and he wasn't there. So I thought, well, how do I tell him what's going on? So there were some dead seals on his porch. There was an old cardboard box and a rusty screwdriver. So I just stabbed open one of the seals, wrote the message in blood on the cardboard and slammed it into his door and ran all the way home. Proper pirate's message if you ever need to make one. And then, of course, I had to organise money in England through our brokers. So got back to England, picked up a cheque for 15,000 quid, went down to the bank immediately below, and the manager refused to cash it. He said, no, I don't know who you are. He said, you could have picked this up in the street. I said, look, why don't you ring up the managing director of Prudential Beige, who gave me the cheque, and you tell him why you're not going to cash it. Oh, that's different. So I found myself in Ireland, and there they were. I've never been on such a black ship in all my life. The morale was rock bottom. These guys didn't care a hoot. And I thought, as leader, I'm now joining this ship. And now we have a duality of leadership because we've got a sailing master, now we've got the expedition leader, and we've got a group that's totally dispirited. They've lost all faith in this boat, quite rightly, frankly. And so somehow I had to override any feelings that I had and lift them out and get them going. And as you know, good ships and men rot in port, so the best place is out of port. So we got going. I thought, right, everything's fixed. We've got to get ourselves to Greenland now because we've got a very expensive film crew waiting up there and they're just about to run out of money, so they'll go home and this will be a complete disaster. So it was a relatively interesting trip. First of all, the fuel tank started leaking and we had to stop the boat and patch it all up. Then the mainsail failed and crashed to the deck, fortunately not killing anybody. And we got that patched up, and then we hit a force 10 storm, which is quite a substantial storm when the whole boat's completely covered in waves. And the steering failed yet again. It simply ripped in half. So good was this British award-winning design. And there we were adrift near Rockall, a bunch of reefs and rocks in the North Atlantic, and we had no option but to go back to Ireland. And I thought, okay, we go back to Ireland, we get it fixed, and then we'll sail to Greenland. We got sailing. And we thought, that's it, the boat's fixed, everything's going to be fine. Shortly afterwards, the rigging collapsed again, another sail dropped to the deck, then we got hit with another force 10 storm. The steering ripped itself in half again. And there we were being belted around in a force 10 storm. And just as we'd slightly fixed the steering, we got news there was a force 15 hurricane just south of us. I thought, oh, what's that? I've never heard of a force 15 before. I know what a force 10 is. I know what a force 12 is. A force 12 is a real hurricane that wipes everything off the face of the earth. But what in God's name is a force 15? And so we all knew on this boat there was no possibility we'd survive this. The boat would not survive. And so we spent a couple of days waiting for it. And fortunately, at the last minute, it turned south and we just got the tail of it. So we got into Iceland. We got all of our steering gear fixed again, and the steering company in England once again refused to pay for it all. Said it's your own fault. I think that what they must have meant, it's my fault for buying it in the first place. Idiot that I was. Because in England, the rule is number one, the customer is always wrong. I don't know if that's changed, but it's always a good place to begin. Or deny, 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 if you're a footballer. Oops, did I say that? Wash my mouth out with vodka and orange. And I thought, right, we'll get going again. Because really, Greenland is just across the water. We'll be there in a couple of days. Thank God for that. So we headed off. Same day as we sailed out of Iceland. Iceland, as you know, is on the mid-Atlantic ridge. This is where the Earth's crustal separation zone happens, and all this stuff bubbles up from below. And of course, I'm driving along, and I'm watching my compass do this. I said, is it my driving? What's happening here? And of course, the whole compass had been demagnetized by the proximity of the magma. So now we're driving into fog. We have no idea on this God's earth where the hell we're going. Fortunately, we've got a satellite navigation system, and every hour or two it tells you where it thinks you are, which is a long way away from where we thought we were. So we turn and we go up here. Greenland's 2,500 kilometres from top to bottom. Yet at one stage we were heading to the North Pole, and on the other stage we were heading to New York. We're going to miss it completely. And it was only a day's sailing away. And then, of course, the wind got up and we could sail. Marvellous. So we turned off the engine and then we couldn't get it started again. Not at all. Which is about just what you want when you're going into Greenland, on one of the most remote coasts on Earth. No wind and no engine. We knew that we had no engine. We had no compass. We had no radio because that had failed. We could hear other people, they couldn't hear us. And of course, the most interesting part of it all was through all of this and travel through Iceland, we now had no money. No money to buy fuel, no money to buy food, no money to go ashore and stay there for the winter and hire a house, no money to get out again. So even before we'd even begun the expedition, we'd been through so many failures. Does this ring a bell with anybody in business? Have you ever had problems like this? When all of your best plans, you've watched them tumble one by one like a set of dominoes, and yet you still keep going because you still believe in yourself. The other problem I face as leader is that we'd arrived in Greenland 2 days before winter began. There is no autumn or spring. There is summer or winter. And of course, at the end of the short summer, which is only a couple of months, you're going from a completely open sea to a completely frozen sea. And I've got to tell you, it takes a lot of storm and a lot of cold and a lot of misery to go from sunny to completely frozen and dark. But it starts when winter begins. So we'd missed our season, we're out of money, and the group was, well, the ship wasn't going, so we weren't going anywhere. So out of the wreckage of failure, I had to build a whole new project on the go. And of course, as leader up there, there's nobody to talk to. There's nobody I can bounce ideas off. You know what it's like. It's a lonely, lonely job. And of course, you people can go home at night and talk to other people, possibly talk to each other, which is what EO is all about. I had nobody to talk to, and I can tell you I have never felt so alone, so at a loss, so incomplete, and I could just see one failure after the other, and it's in my nature to accept responsibility for everything and look to myself first for the failures before I begin to look outside of myself and accuse other people. Who's handy? So we got everybody going, and somehow I managed to persuade people that this is what we'd come for. The sun was still shining. It was relatively ice-free. I said, even though theoretically winter is on us, we need to go. And I don't know why, but they followed me.